it was received, this idea, by the mainstream psychology?
It still has not been accepted in the academic circles, which is extremely remarkable to me, because it involves such a logical error that I would not expect it from a community of people who were trained in rigorous logical thinking. For example, there's a general agreement among child psychiatrists and obstetricians that the time immediately after birth is extremely important. There's general agreement that nursing is important. Nuances of nursing are important. The obstetrician talk about bonding. People like Marshall Klaus, which is that exchange of looks between the mother and the child after birth can influence the entire relationship between the mother and the child. We also have now a lot of research showing that the fetus is already very sensitive, very receptive in the uterus, prenatally. So we have a situation that the fetus is sensitive and conscious in the womb, and then immediately after birth, but the hours of passage through the birth canal, which is a potentially life-threatening situation, is not seen as a psychotrauma, which is incredible if you think about it. When we ask our patients about birth, but what's behind it is that if the birth was so bad that it damaged irreversibly the brain cells, then we would take it seriously. But that the experience itself is not seen as a trauma, which is very, very surprising. And the reason that's usually given is that the cortex of the newborn is not mature enough to be able to record that kind of experience. And the technical term is myelinization, that the neurons of the cortex of the newborn child is not completely covered, or are not completely covered by myelin, which is a fatty substance. But there's another sort of logical problem, because we know that organisms that don't have a cortex at all have memory. Memory is somehow a property of living matter. So we had a situation many years ago, maybe 15 or more years ago, an Austrian-American scientist, Eric Kandel, received a Nobel Prize for studying memory mechanisms in a sea slug, in a sea snail. So sea snails have memory, but the newborn cannot remember birth because the cortex is not myelinized. So there are such logical inconsistencies that the only explanation I have for it is that the experience of birth is so scary, is so challenging, so difficult, that we don't want to go there, we don't want to deal with it, and we use our intellect to just dismiss it. Or this couldn't have been important, my cortex was not myelinized.
But this is in connection with the idea that the consciousness is a product of the brain, of the body, and so if the brain is not ready to produce consciousness, then it can't be. This is the main idea, if I understand well.
Actually, when I was studying medicine, there was also a belief that the newborns don't feel anything. So, for example, when some medical interventions were done, there was no anesthesia was used, and routinely circumcision is performed without any anesthesia, whether it's in medical circles or in rituals, spiritual situations like in Islam or in Judaism. But it's very interesting that I found much friendly and even exciting reaction to our findings among quantum relativistic physicists than among psychologists or psychiatrists. And I feel, you know, a lot of admiration for physicists. They were able to change their perspective on the universe so radically on the basis of relatively small inconsistencies, whereas we have vast amount of data, you see, pointing to a whole new understanding of the psyche and consciousness. It simply does not have much impact.
There is also a vast variety of psychology schools, and
Yeah.
that's why.
Well, I think one of the major reasons is that this cannot be handled by some small change, by say patchwork, what's called ad hoc hypothesis. We would have to somehow admit not only that we have most of it wrong, but that some shamans of illiterate cultures, know much more about the psyche than academically trained psychiatrists and psychologists, and that even in centuries ago in the spiritual philosophies of India and so on, there was understanding of the psyche and consciousness that goes way beyond anything that the industrial civilization produced, and it's very humbling, I think. In physics, really the findings did not in any way discount Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics still has its validity within a certain range, and then these are additions. If you go to, you can use Newtonian physics within the world that Fritjof Capra called the world of the middle dimensions. But if you go into the micro world, and if you go into cosmology and so on, then you have to go to quantum relativistic physics. Whereas if we sort of introduce the changes in psychology and psychiatry, this would be radical changes. It would not be that the old psychology is still there, valid, and that you are adding something new, but you really have to change basically everything.
Not only after these discoveries of the science, mainly in the quantum physics, not only the psychology, but even the medicine, the usual medicine of the body, the physiology, should change a little bit, because if we are not completely material, but the flesh and bones that are made by atoms, and there are some energies inside flowing and things, what the quantum physics they know already, this should change completely the view, our perspective about the human body and the physiology and of the medicine. And it looks like this changement is very hard. The medicine in our days is the same as 100 years ago, plus the technology is the same view.
Yeah, we have, I think we have additional problems, which is that there are many perspectives in modern psychiatry that are supported by the cooperation with the pharmaceutical industry. There's a certain approach to emotional and psychosomatic problems that's moving in the direction of psychopharmacology, control of symptoms, rather than sort of going deep to the roots and addressing the causes, the underlying causes. So there's a whole also economic structure that somehow supports the status quo. And from a practical point of view, the kind of work that we're talking about is much more demanding. It's it's much easier to give people some pills and send them home. It's also much easier to do psychoanalytic sessions. I remember from my own analysis, I was in the middle of something and the analyst says 55 minutes over, we will continue on Thursday. You cannot do this when you do some powerful experiential work. You have to stay with people, you have to complete, you know. Now there's of course another perspective here that if you put a lot of energy, you know, at the beginning, then you can actually change things, and the person will live a better life. Whereas if you don't put much energy into the beginning, then it's going to continue for years. You know, the maintenance dosages of various kinds, or psychotherapeutic sessions and so on. So investing a lot of time at the beginning can really cause radical changes which are more or less lasting.